Welcome to the Let's Actuate podcast interview series, where we speak to leaders in VC, venture building, and future technologies, and we discuss the current state and trajectory of their domains. Let's dive in.
Good morning.
Good afternoon.
And good evening to our fellow audience members, wherever you are. Welcome to the Let's Actuate podcast. We have an amazing guest today, Rama Afullo, founder and CEO of Satlyt, a VC-backed startup developing software-only intersatellite networks, basically a virtual data center in space. Before founding Satlyt, Rama worked at SpaceX on the Starlink program with a tenure at Google before that, where he led global partnerships. He also has a master's in space systems engineering from Johns Hopkins. So he is a space guy through and through, and a deep innovator. We're really excited to see where Satlyt goes and how it will shape the industry, because it is sorely needed.
Yeah. No, thank you.
Welcome to the podcast. Rama, if there's another intro that you want to slot in, tell me about yourself and what you got going on right now.
Yeah, sure. Firstly, thanks so much, Andrew and Chris. Appreciate it. Thank you for the introduction. Thanks for the invitation here as well. It's much appreciated. As you said, my name is Rama Afullo, founder and CEO of Satlyt. One thing I will add is I didn't quite finish that master's in space systems engineering at Johns Hopkins, although it looks like they are trying to invest in me now. So, the joke's on them. So maybe I'll go back for the honorary doctorate. I think when I got my green card, I was like, no, it's time for me to go join SpaceX, and then time for me to start this startup. So, but happy to be here, and let's get after it.
Okay, what's the 30-second pitch version of what Satlyt's up to?
Yeah, sure. The easiest way to think about us is that we want to be the connective tissue in space. We are networking satellites in space. And by virtue of that, we become the above cloud service provider. We install a containerized solution directly into satellites in orbit and find novel ways for them to interconnect with each other and help folks monetize the excess compute capacity of these satellites in orbit. I think the end result is that we end up creating an Android equivalent to SpaceX's iPhone, which is Starlink, right? And help folks to be interoperable in orbit for a variety of different reasons, but it makes a lot of business sense as well.
Excellent. So we here at Actuate love amazing space companies. Tell us the journey. Like, why build Satlyt? What did you see as the need, and when did you start thinking about it?
Yeah, sure. So Satlyt's like an amalgamation of the stuff I did at three different companies, right? At Tesla, I was in energy products, and sort of pivoted their focus from the Powerwall, selling that into sort of selling to the residential market, and instead focusing on selling that into the small commercial market. And that, to me, like looking at the telecommunications vertical and seeing how folks were starting to sell off their towers to tower companies, and mobile network operators were taking less ownership of that, and instead focusing on their core product, and turning the tower company side into a financial model, like that sparked a thought in me. Right? And then furthermore, like when I was at Google, at one stage I was in cloud engineering, and I got to understand how Kubernetes works and how containerized solutions works, and how you can sort of work across different products and different hardware solutions, but have the exact same software solution that you can containerize and you can ship over across the board. And then finally at Starlink, realized a few things. Firstly, latency is a massive issue. It's one of the biggest issues at SpaceX. It's just one of the biggest issues in telecoms and in the space industry in general. And then beyond that, data loss is still a massive issue in the space industry, right? So when you combine those two things, I thought, hey, like edge nodes, some sort of edge compute system would end up making the most sense. Then you start talking about communications, and you realize, well, a lot of folks actually don't speak the same language. People create sort of a bespoke communications protocol every time they start a new space company. And that just doesn't seem very efficient, right? So there's an opportunity to combine a lot of these different things, combine my background in mechanical engineering and space systems engineering, and look towards what is the best possible path. And actually, initially, when I was thinking about this like 3 or 4 years ago, I actually put together a pitch deck to focus on data centers in space, right, and build out the physical data centers. But for me, I thought, well, what is the most scalable solution, right? What's the most useful solution? Not to put down anyone who's sort of focusing on the sort of high capex data center play, but those folks also will probably be collaborators with us, right? Where they'll end up being nodes in some sort of ecosystem that we end up co-developing. But in the end, I think the trade study won out, showed for us, at least from our perspective, that the software first play makes a lot of sense, that there is the capacity to help change the way that folks put out their satellites and how they actually build them for cross-linking capabilities. And that this was a path that, for me, called out to me because we really don't want to deal with a space industry that's ruled by one or two monopolies.
Andrew, uh, you have a lot of in the industry, um, and what are what can you say is your take on the burgeoning market?
Yeah, the nice thing to see is leveraging the existing infrastructure. There's a lot of interest in the decentralization of data processing. And I do have to say there's a special place in my heart as well for SaaS specific space companies. We don't see a lot of them. And so when you can combine the benefit of um, the potential for SaaS scale and that whole model with the emerging wave of the space industry as a whole, just from that stance is something that kind of piques my eyes to take a look into further. Rama, one thing I'd love to hear from you is while satellite is relatively new, it is picking up a lot of attention. You got some traction going. What were some of the things that you've got lined up that converted some of the speculative interest into really like tangible, okay, let me give you money so you could start to build this thing out? What has that been like, and what are some of the things that you see and that they're seeing in you?
Yeah, sure. I think right off the bat, uh, probably my background helped a lot, right? Like useful. Like if folks are doubting whether or not something is possible, they'll bid on the founder, and that has turned out to be true. So our initial backers, Antler and Slauson and Co., they saw that, and I thank them for that, because that's made a lot of things possible. But beyond that, I think we're deeply entrenched in the NASA ecosystem. NASA, to me, is one of the greatest organizations ever created. I love NASA, right? The fact that they're a civilian organization and always have been is just amazing, right? Like, folks don't understand how sick it is that you've got the space company has worked in tandem with a lot of folks that we'd see as our enemies, right? To create some of the best works of any sort of architecture, any human development that we've ever seen, like co-developing the International Space Station and the likes, right? So we got deeply entrenched in the NASA ecosystem, and right after sort of starting the company, started talking to folks at the NASA Glenn Research Center, for example, in depth, and they were great, right? They believe in distributed compute. They saw a potential for us to collaborate together, and that actually opened up my eyes to some of the grants that are out there. And we are one of only 47 companies that won a NASA SGTR grant very recently. So I think that those proof points have been useful. But I'd say beyond that as well, there's a sheer force of being mission driven about something that you feel deeply is super important for the industry, right? It's something that opens up space to everyone, right? Rather than consolidating power with just a few. And I think that resonates with a lot of folks. And then probably last but not least is when you talk to satellite operators and you tell them, hey, you can make more money off of your satellite, right? Like just deploy this one line of code, right? And you can interoperate with other folks, and any of your excess compute, right, can be something that folks buy off of you, and you don't have to just right size your satellite all the time. It I mean, it's a no-brainer conversation, but like just show us the proof points, right? So we've actually already got a couple of customers lined up for next quarter. We'll be launching this directly and just testing out our software in orbit.
Nice. And what are some of the problem spaces you're going to be testing your software with?
Yep. So the way we like to think about this is sort of is a three-pronged approach, sort of step by step. So initially, first we want to actually optimize the satellite itself, right? So using AI inference, if you've got a hyperspectral Earth observation camera, for example, we can do AI inference, we can do field boundary detection, we can look at agriculture, we can look at a bunch of different things, right? And just help you optimize even within your payloads, right? And find different ways that you can work with those different customers. Because for a few folks, that's just a black box, right? Hey, our customers have slotted in. We're able to give them access to their telemetry, access to their resources, and that's that, right? But there's actually a lot more that you can do there. Then next for us, which is a slightly easier undertaking than the third step, is networking homogeneous systems, right? That's where we start looking at folks who have shared architectures of some sort, right? And that's it's like, look, I've got an inter-satellite link, you've got an ISL2, let's handshake, right? And that handshake actually ends up being fairly straightforward, especially because right now, I mean, folks are using Jetson Nanos, Raspberry Pis, then they're sort of cross-linking using very similar architecture. They just like add their own wrapper on top. So it's not too difficult to do that. You just have to get past sort of the security questions that you might get at that point, right? Like, hey, what happens if, the wrong person gets access to my satellite, which of course you don't ask, not anymore about like what happens if the wrong person gets access to my computer every time I plug into the internet, right? But of course there was that fear with a whole bunch of viruses right at the beginning. It's a similar thing. Then the final boss, right, is the heterogeneous systems, right? Now that's when I think things get tricky. But if we can nail that, I think we end up bringing on a whole bunch of people onto this ride, right? That previously didn't even think about the fact that they could do more than just point down, right? Point up and down with their satellite, right? So that's when we can cross-link with folks with varied architectures and sort of move the needle in terms of how folks think about deploying the satellites.
So how much spare compute is there right now, and how much are you expecting?
Yeah. So from my perspective, we tend to not look at it in that way, right? I think that's it's the obvious question, right? Like quantify this thing for me, right? And the way I think about it instead is that you've got currently 16,000 satellites in space. I mean, 16 to 20, depending on who you ask, right? And up until a few weeks ago, the theory was we'd get to about 50,000 satellites in space, or at least those that are worth us like having conversations with those operators. But now that, Starship's actually had a successful IFT-10, right? Now we're looking at potentially 100,000, 200,000, but we'll see, right? Anyone and their mom and their cousin who are thinking about deploying a satellite like probably will be able to at that point, assuming they get past deploying all the Starlink satellites that they want to deploy, and then maybe all the government customers, and then the rest of us will come into play at that point, I imagine. So the way I think about it is there's more to it than just the amount of teraflops, amount of excess compute that is there. What is important to think about is what is excess compute, right? Like your downtime that you previously didn't think about could be that you're an Earth observation satellite focused on taking photos of the Earth, but 60% of your flight path is over oceans, right? We can take that downtime, and that's someone else's, like, what's your trash is someone else's treasure, right? Because that downtime then can be repurposed as excess compute for very specific purposes, or your satellite can be used as a relay, right? To avoid cloud cover, to avoid electromagnetic interference, to avoid a whole bunch of things, right? And if you think about this sort of critical mass of satellites, like as they increase, as we get to 50, 100,000 satellites as well, we start sort of networking across them, federated downlink, federated satellite systems in general, like we stop thinking about like, well, is there enough excess compute for us? And we start thinking instead that, oh, the things I previously used to rely on sort of Earth-based data centers doing, I can use this interconnected network to do for me, right? And that I think is more important. And what I project, what I predict actually, my conjecture here is that in a few years, folks will stop right-sizing their satellites the same way Airbnb, like folks like myself, I bought an apartment just to put it up on Airbnb, right? Folks will stop right-sizing their satellites and instead will be building a satellite for a specific case, but oversizing it because they want to participate in this network, right?
Interesting.
Yeah.
How about undersizing?
Sorry?
Undersizing.
So very much like you were saying, right? Like buying an apartment or a small efficiency for the purpose of Airbnb being the data processing.
Yeah.
Is that a good analogy?
You could, I mean, you could do that.
Extra small. So if you have remote compute,
Yes.
right, for satellites, between satellites,
Yes.
then are you expecting a new class of even smaller CubeSats?
I mean, we're actually currently talking to NASA and the aerospace corporation, sorry, about their disk sats, right? So there are folks working on even smaller satellites, sort of architectures. Uh, like I don't see a reason why we can't, right? I mean, the Planet Labs started off like chucking like smartphones into space and, just seeing if that'll work as a satellite, for example. So that's definitely a possibility. But then we get into like, what is the purpose of the satellite, right? Like, what is it that the satellite is actually doing? Because at that point, it's like, well, if you're not on the sell side of this marketplace, right? You're only on the buy side, but you don't have the ability to actually translate that data to something that's useful for yourself, right? Then it seems like a bit of a pointless satellite. So I'd probably say maybe rather than undersize, like you folks can get away with continuing to right size, but I would just say, well, might make sense for you to actually just oversize so that you participate on both sides of this overall marketplace, because it'll just make more sense for you. But that's my initial thought. Folks will have different thought processes, and of course, there's folks in the Department of War and folks in who actually only want to be on one side of this equation. They only want to be on the buy side, right? So maybe that ends up making sense for them. Who knows?
When it comes to the current challenges on our end, that we're seeing is like, okay, traditionally you want to do communication, you're putting up a satellite, you're also putting up your transceivers that match the intent. There's no standard. There are standards, but there's no so you're talking about interoperability without hardware, right? So how are you going about that?
So the way we think about this is network conformity, right? Rather than I mean, I always used to talk about a standardized communications protocol in space, but I've since learned that folks don't exactly enjoy folks talking about standards, right? And I think about it more like the way the TCP/IP protocol here on Earth came together, right? It's like a whole bunch of different standards, different communications protocols, and one way to sort of like direct the flow, right, of these different protocols is the way we think about it in space. In fact, there are folks using Ethernet and TCP/IP, right, in orbit, right? But there are a few things we have to think about. One of the things that we're doing with our NASA SUTR is using sort of a protocol that NASA has been creating called the high rate delay tolerant network. Within that as well, like this is like you can like delay sending packets to Mars and to the moon, etc. Right? Like it's super high precision stuff, right? But probably not necessary until maybe geostationary orbit here, right? But just in general, the way we think about this is like we end up helping co-develop the way that folks start to cross-communicate with each other. And uh, the most logical path, in my opinion, is that folks will actually start adding in the right type of hardware to make that happen in the end. We don't have to force that function. And I think that's something that folks have maybe gone about this the wrong way, is like everyone kumbaya, like let's work together just because, right? I don't think forcing that through ends up making too much sense, or saying, hey, everyone buy our hardware, or we've added these master nodes in space and that will solve your problems, right? Like I don't, at least for me, I don't think I'd personally resonate with that, right? The business case has to make so much sense that I'm willing to put skin in the game and modify how I go about doing things. And the way we see it is that there's a critical window of maybe 2 or 3 years or so, right, before the number of satellites gets to a point where like this doesn't even make sense pushing anymore, right? I'll go build a chat GPT wrapper and get rich or something, right? But I think there's a 2 or 3 window where if we're able to deploy this, right, we'll actually be in a really, really strong position to actually open up the space ecosystem, right? But yeah, we've got to get ahead of a lot of the deployments of satellites that are out there as well, which is why we're pushing hard right now.
We don't want to end up in a situation like when we were first installing electrical lines and everyone crisscrossed from the power plant to the home. But that's what satellites are kind of doing right now, right? Maybe they're sharing a couple of ground stations, and then I think there's a lot of space in space now. With the entrant of the 100,000, the 200,000 satellites coming on to LEO and then hopefully GEO and beyond, or VLEO,
Mm-hmm.
what is that 50-year vision for satellite? What are you thinking grand scheme? What are you unlocking?
Yeah, I think that the Android versus iPhone conversation is helpful. Then I think like folks like Kuiper, Amazon's Kuiper. Is it Kuiper or Kuiper? I've never actually known. Right?
Kuiper.
Yeah, Kuiper, right? Like folks like them, I think are good for the market, good for folks, because I mean, OneWeb was the original Starlink, right? And they're not necessarily like putting a dent the way they really could have. But I think that there'll be a lot more fragmentation in the market unless we're careful about it. I think competition is good. What would be even better is if we all sort of agree on a few different like sets of facts, right? Like it's a fact that we shouldn't let any one player buy up all the spectrum, right? It's a fact that we will run into issues with space debris, and it will be a problem for us here on Earth if we're not careful, right? But it's also a fact that we will actually just not be able to stop the number of satellites increasing. Everyone wants their own sovereignty, right? It's very difficult for you to police that. It's difficult to start policing what a satellite's flight path ends up looking like at some point, right? There's a lot of things that I think are still need some work, unless you say everyone is on geo and this is your little quadrant, right? Otherwise it ends up not making too much sense. So I think that within 50 years what would be great is every bit of spacecraft that actually wants to is interoperable, right? Uh, like we are not just so we don't just have satellites on Earth, right? We've got a lunar base. We've got a base across not just like Mars and whatnot. In fact, I'm not really like too big on the Mars mission, to be honest, myself. But if we're looking at, like outside of our solar system, right, that to me is super interesting, right? And I've spoken to some folks like Vint Cerf, who's one of the godfathers of the internet. He's at Google, and in my conversations with him, like, you know, he's seeing things well beyond all of this, right? I guess after you sort of co-found the internet, you probably like get bored of like the usual day to day, right? But folks like that, I think, are looking at life as, quite different from the way we see things. Am I envisioning like everything being interplanetary and multiplanetary? Uh, I think for me, it's neither here nor there. Right? We've got a lot of things to fix here, but what I do see is satellite being a big player in the overall space ecosystem, and downstream of that as well, sort of helping folks on Earth. Right? We're currently B2B, but the plan is to be B2B to C as well, and to be B2C also, right? Directly, right? Because I feel like folks need access to space systems much more than they need to. It's just a case of sort of educating folks. Like without space, there's no sort of solar panels, there's no GPS, no microwaves, there's no telecommunications in general, right? Like really got developed to a point because of the space ecosystem. So we see ourselves being a massive player in the space ecosystem going forward. I'm not building this out for like an acquisition, right? So I see this as being something that's super crucial for the space ecosystem.
And let's touch on that for a little bit. So for us normies, and you kind of started to hint at like the first stages of that, but what does a B2B to C start to look like, and how do we get there?
Yeah. So for us, since we don't build out the hardware, the way we think about this is our first customer, most important customers, are the satellite operators and the space agencies, right? These are folks who own the satellites and the folks who create the space for you to actually harness satellites out there. And of course, the FCC and ITU, I won't forget y'all, all right? But I think for us, it's the B2B to C side is more about how do we first network these satellites, all right? And then how do we get folks to be able to easily deploy their own apps directly onto these satellites, all right? So I'll give you an example. There's a point when we were experimenting with a few different downstream applications, and one of them was called AgriSat, right? Which I don't talk about often anymore, right? Because I canned it, right? Not because it was working, but because it had the opportunity to work, but would have made us very unfocused. Now, AgriSat was focused on the sort of predictive analytics for the agricultural vertical, right? And looking at like yield predictions and famines and that sort of thing, right? But this is something that the way we looked at it is you could actually build directly from our dashboard, right? Which at the time we were going to make publicly available, and you could build out these apps and locally confine them to your specific use case. So like an individual farmer could actually build a custom app for their specific farm, right? And be able to get real-time data access from all the satellites that are networked at any given point in time, instead of waiting for a week from like Sentinel-2 and whatnot, right? And be able to make decisions on the spot with insights that are a lot more useful for them, right? So this is where, when we start thinking about B2B to C, like that's what we're looking at. Or like wildfire detection, for example, like what happened in Pasadena in LA, right? Where folks, insurance providers did a switcheroo on folks a week before because they had access to much more advanced data, right? But what we can do is make it bespoke so that also dynamically to switch away from your insurance provider as they make some changes, so that you're protected. Because I mean, how are you going to be able to sort of like fight this wildfire? But you can use predictive analytics to understand the like sort of rate of change of how some of these things could work. I'm sure someone is working on this as like a core business idea, and I'm just ruining things for people right now, right? But these are things. Yeah, and then Google's actually working on something called Firesat that's doing something similar, right? But these are things that are, I think, for me, like it ends up opening up a whole bunch of things that are useful to people on a day-to-day, that they can build out these custom apps on the spot, and even just delete the app right after, right? Like as soon as they don't need it, right? Like that's not even a worry. I think the way we view apps and whatnot could change significantly, but I want to be able to provide that overall marketplace on the B2B2C side.
It sounds like when satellite is fully up and running, it'll feel to me as if it was like AWS. I go in, I choose these packages
Yes.
for the compute wrapper, going like, I want, I don't know, some hyperspectral thing. I don't care who it comes from, right? But I want the compute for that application, and then you are the marketplace for those APIs,
Yeah.
or that's part of it.
Yeah, that's part of it. I mean, look, it ends up being an end-to-end cloud service, right? And what managed services folks need is what we'll build out, right? And this is like co-located across tens of thousands of satellites in the end, right? Where whoever's resources are being used is actually being paid out for those resources, sort of dynamically, right? But yeah, whatever products, whatever services folks will end up needing, like we want to be able to provide that in space, in situ, right, on the edge, right, without having to worry about deploying anything on Earth first, right? That's really the end goal.
That's a really interesting consideration as well. And then if you talk about, or if you reference earlier how you were talking about interlocking homogenized systems, which I'd love for you to translate for us normies, and heterogeneous systems as well. But basically, you're not just the data processing side, you also have access to these additional functional capabilities as well, such as sensing systems and whether they're visual or other types.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly it. I think I've spent like a lot of time trying to translate my language a little bit, right, to make it a bit more accessible. But that's exactly it. Like we want to take any sort of telemetry on board, want to get any type of system, the thermal systems, the EPS, like whatever telemetry we can find, the sensory data, right, and be able to add these systems into like one bucket for you. All right. So I know there's folks doing concentrated solar power, but think about this: like if you've got specific power needs, right? And this is when I get a little bit sci-fi, right? And my team hates when I do this. Like, let's just solve a problem, man. Right? It's like if you've got like specific power needs, what we could potentially do is actually use this entire network as a power draw, right? The same way there's virtual power plants, right? If there's specific data that you're looking for that another satellite in the network has already collected, right? And they're willing to give you access to that data, right? It's like a quick, it's the same way sort of bidding works on Google Ads, right? It's a quick bidding system. Like they put this out for grabs, folks who need it. The sort of the highest bidder will pay 1 cent more than the second highest bidder, or whatever the mechanism ends up being that we put together. Like those are things that we can solve for in real time right now. In fact, like in our simulations, like I often just create simulations, like trying to like, map a lot of these ideas out, and super straightforward to do these days with AI, right? Like 6 months ago, I couldn't do some of the stuff we're doing now, right? It's so insane. So those are like, it's just a matter at this point of folks' desire to be in that ecosystem and their trust in what we're building, right? And I think that's the most important thing.
What are some of the because you're a platform,
Mhm.
people are coming to you with like, hey, can you do a thing? What is the most wild or interesting use cases people have brought?
I mean,
How about
there's
something
definitely people who want
surprising?
to. There's definitely people who want to use this as spyware, right? For sure, right? We've we've been approached by some 3-letter organizations I should not name, right? But I mean, you can see the logical path to this being like install spyware. So we are absolutely not going down that path, right? Absolutely not, right? At least not while I'm CEO, right? Like that's not a thing that I ever want to see happen, because that'll be the exact opposite reason. We might as well have just gone for, like, one of the biggest reasons why we didn't go for sort of physical edge compute boxes or physical satellites ourselves was because of the trust that it brings, right? Like when you're trying to get folks to speak on your to operate on your standardized protocol, but you're technically a competitor because you've got a camera on board and you can do a lot of the things that they can do. It's sort of difficult psychologically unless you've got a weird power imbalance to like win that out, right? So I think I think that'll be my answer.
So a question about that actually, all about the decentralization and equalization of that power balance, right? But what does security start to look like in a world of decentralized access?
Yeah, sure. I mean, like it's part of our secret sauce, but at the same time, I mean, it's like it's a fairly solved problem right now, right? A solution is containerized, zero trust policies, end-to-end encryption, right? And it's completely on the satellite operator or the user to make those decisions, right? So it's a two-way opt-in, right? So you make the decision that you want these specific resources and nothing else to be available to people in real time, and folks will make that decision to actually use those resources. But there's no way they can access anything else on your satellite, right? It's specifically within our containerized solution that they access this, right? And if there's an issue, remotely, not remotely, regardless of whether or not we're connected to a ground station or not, we can switch that off, right? On the spot, right? So, and that's also the beauty of all these satellites being networked, right? So for us, from our perspective, like, yeah, I mean, from our simulations, like there's no risks. Well, there's very little risks. I'm sure someone will come up with some risks for us, like later on down the path, right? But it is still something that we've got to spend a lot of time educating people on, right? Like a lot of satellite operators, they're not software engineers for the most part, right? They know, hey, I get data in space, I send it back down, and that data makes me money, right? End of story, right? For the most part. But if we start educating folks on what this could potentially do for them, and I think these next flights, these first flights that we have coming up next quarter will be very useful for us, because you will hear from us after that point, right? We'll be very loud about it, right? I think that will sort of be the tipping point for a lot more folks like wanting to really participate in this. Like right now, folks are curious, right? But enough people have been burned to the space ecosystem about interoperability and whatnot, right? That they're like, okay, that sounds cool. You're doing it slightly differently from what other folks have done, but will you still exist in a year? So we'll just have to prove that out first.
And what kind of, because you also mentioned satellite optimization with AI, which is really interesting consideration as well. What have the conversations been like with existing satellite providers and owners around just that capability?
About the optimization side?
The optimization, leveraging your
Yeah.
protocol and AI.
Yeah, I think the first thing for them is that they're super happy we're not adding any box onto their system, right? Like they're not putting some edge compute device or adding a payload, right? It's just a software payload. So that tends to be great because a lot of them can just provide a Linux environment for us to play with, right? Which more than fine by us. So I think the ease of like working with us, I think folks appreciate that as well. There's a lot of, like, even before we get to the cross-linking side of things, there's lots of things that folks take for granted. Our team is just computer scientists and software engineers, really, right? And we know how to optimize a lot of these things, like simple things, right? Like, why would you send all this data down, right? For example, like, what is it that you're gaining when you send all of this data down to the ground station or to mission control or whatever? You ask that question, like, oh, I mean, that's what we do. But the question is why? Of this 5 terabytes of data you collected today, what percentage of it was genuinely useful?
Grand question.
Right? Or what was useful? And you deep dive a little bit more, you realize it's like less than 1%, right? was actually useful and did something for folks. So now you start talking to them about how they could actually optimize that path. So people get really excited, right? And then they get ahead of themselves. Like I often get emails from partners and future customers, like, "Hey, I think we're ready for inter-satellite linking right now." Okay, well, do you have inter-satellite links on your on your satellite? Well, I mean, not yet. Okay, well, we should probably first optimize the satellite. But yeah, so usually we actually have to bring people back to understanding that this is actually a great step for them first of all. And with these first couple of launches, like that's what we're going to be focused on. Both of them want to cross-link, right? Both of them want to have inter-satellite links running across the board. But for them, these are their first satellite launches themselves as well. So it's like, okay, well, let's optimize this, and they're already now thinking about ways that that optimization and sort of like onboard AI inference is actually going to be useful for them. Also, of course, brings in the headlines. So I imagine we're going to be getting used for their own fundraising also, right? I see that coming, right? Because we've got a pretty strong like relationship with like Google, for example, and we're going to run a version of Google Gemma, right, directly on one of these satellites. So that'll be like natural language processing on the edge in space, right?
Pretty dope.
Directly using our software, and you can task the payloads on your satellite just by like talking to them, which I think is fairly sick, right? So yeah.
Better than the local micro Gemma that's on my phone. That's for sure. Completely offline. It's like, wow, this thing's hallucinating like crazy, but it runs locally. So we'll see what kind of box they set up. Are you allowed to talk about some of the partners on the launch, or
Well, I can go into a little bit of detail. Might be tricky. Let's
might be
leave.
tricky?
Yeah. Let's leave that off. I mean, I can talk to both of you about it. Actually, let me think about it. I'm trying
There's a
to.
thread of FOMO right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember
Wait,
how
okay.
we've set up these contracts. Only one of them is public, so we can talk about Catalyst Space, right? Who we're working with, and yeah, like look, it's exactly what I've said, like onboard, um, sort of AI inference and running a few things as well. Like we'll make the real announcements public, right?
Perfect.
Soon, right? Probably in the next 2 or 3 months, right? But yeah, definitely working with Catalyst Space. There are a couple of others as well, right? So I don't want to give away too much in that regard, right? But yeah, and you can find on my LinkedIn like our public announcement about some of the work that we're doing with them as well. I know it's a good question, right? I wish I could just put everything out there.
Of course.
I will say this as well, right? Is that we are, I mean, we're working quite closely with NASA on a few different things, and NASA has stated, if you look at their, they put out an announcement for collaboration opportunities, right? A month and a half ago, right? And topic 3 is on small spacecraft distributed compute.
Mm,
And so we're definitely like, let's just say
Involved.
we are working with them. We're deep in there, right? Like trying to make
yes.
sure we're working with them on that as well, right? This is one of their key topics now, and across we're talking like 6 different NASA centers, and all of them are solving for distributed compute in some capacity in a different way, right? So we're trying to also like thread the needle through all of those, right? And sort of work backwards there. I think that's as far as I'll go.
Now, with the state of the space economy, right?
Mhm.
It's people are really eyeing AI for everything, but when you look at the actual numbers, space revenue is larger than AI revenue right now. A little hidden fact, but given the way that the technologies are moving in the future, um, and what we know about the space industry and the capital markets, do you have any concerns or considerations for the future that you're addressing or you're worried might crop up?
Yeah, I mean, we operate at the interface of space AI and the cloud, right? Like that's our bread and butter. I think that there are a few things that I hope just stay on Earth from the AI race, right? And they don't creep up into the space ecosystem. Um, and I think space has already had this problem, which is why we're staying away from it. Is a lot of the hype-driven stuff, right? That is only good because it's venture backed, right? And it just continues to grow because it's venture backed. And it turns out that it's a whole lot of nothing. I think we'll see a lot of that, right? Like a lot of the vibe coding apps, like some of them we're not hearing about at all anymore, right? They were meant to be unicorns, right? Others have taken over, but then at a certain point, if Cursor crashes or Anthropic crashes, they just like they just get knocked out immediately. And of course, everything is built on something, right? I get that entirely. But I think that part of what led the space industry to being so fragmented in their approach was because they got a lot of these hard knocks, right? They got dealt a lot of heavy blows, right? And that took them to a position where they started thinking about things from, well, I won't work with that comms protocol because I went down that one time, right? And that wasn't great, right? Or I won't work with that launch provider because like I saw that explosion, right? And my satellites were on it. So a lot of that has led to a lot of boxed in thinking. And I hope that that doesn't continue because I can see that now starting to happen on the AI side, like where everyone's like, oh, free and fair, all right? Like, we're going after it. But now you're starting to see like these like publicly disclosed MOUs, like we are partners, not them. You can't work with them, right? Like, and that sort of a approach, which is of course the natural progression of things. But I think the other thing is maybe overinflated like valuations, right? Is going to be a problem for a lot of folks, right? It'll stop a lot of the growth of a lot of these companies, and I hope that doesn't come to the space side. But on the bright side, the level of advancement that we can make because of the AI revolution is not to be trifled with, right? Like things that we can do that are super high tech that I never even saw it like being at my fingertips like this before, right? Like just like creating dashboards on the spot, like code developing like a mission engineering like principles just like by with natural language. Like I just wanted to do this thing, right? And it does it. Oh man, that's beautiful, right? Like although it does piss me off a little bit that I'm not like 18 right now. So that would be great to have that during my undergrad. I spent a lot of time like struggling through that mechanical engineering, like thermal fluids. Oh my god, I wish I had this, right? So I think it changes the calculus of how we operate, but I think it's net positive for the space industry as long as we don't fall back into the same traps. Because I think are we at 3.0 now or 2.0? New space, whatever point
Yeah.
oh we are at,
And there's
right?
enough red tape already.
Yeah, exactly. What would be nice? Oh, please. Like this is one thing. Like I might have my disagreements here and there, but if we were to just deregulate a lot of like the ITAR stuff, like it would change the game for the space industry, right? Like there's so many customers we just cannot work with, right? But that looks like even AI. Like how are you gonna regulate math? You can't, right? It's kind of difficult. Like, hey, your math, this is the bad math, right? Like that's difficult for them to do, but space is heavily regulated, right? I think if we can find ways to copy that from the space revolution, from the AI revolution, uh, that changes the game for space as well.
Encryption is technically regulated under arms, but no one cares.
Yeah, I mean, I've been told it's like folks want to host our algorithms, and we spoke to some folks at DoD. They're like, absolutely not. Like, okay, well, I guess there's that opportunity gone. But yeah,
If we lower the barrier or get rid of the barriers imposed by ITAR, within that opens up the talent pool, the
yep,
expertise and the thinking and the diversity
Yep.
from engineers across the world.
hmm
And that kind of leads me to a question about your endeavors personally, because outside of satellite, um, what are your personal goals?
Yeah. Well, the first thing that comes to mind to me is I have an amazing partner. She's genuinely amazing. So there's no chance, all right? Like if there was like an anti-immigrant like uprising, I would stay. I'll find a way, right? Like she's amazing. So my personal goals, I think, you can probably insinuate there as well with her. But yeah, look, I moved to America just over 4 years ago. Got my green card like a couple of years ago as well, right? And like you said, hey, look, without before that, I was actually interviewing at SpaceX like a few months into coming to the US, but I couldn't join SpaceX at the time because I didn't have a green, right? And that was with the direct to sell team. They were making all the hubbub with this EchoStar Spectrum purchase. But yeah, I think for me, like personally, first of all, like probably in the next 3 years or so, I'll probably become a naturalized citizen, which for me, I'm looking forward to. Simplifies my life a lot. Beyond that, I did have a vision of being a Muay Thai kickboxing champion, and that's not happening. Right? I've had 3 fights, 2 draws, and 1 loss. Right, so that's probably not a good record, right? I imagine, So yeah. Aside from that, look, I love to travel, but my goals are like build this thing out, build Satlyt out, uh, make sure it's thriving, and start something else that's also interesting to me. Right? There's a few ideas swirling in my head. Like yeah, I did wanna sort of like solve a lot of things in the sort of entrepreneurship side, and that was my first business, like way back, like one platform to rule them all, like everything you need, every investor, and it's super easy to do now. It's just more about community building. But maybe I'll do that at some point, but it'll probably be something else in like hard tech. All right, I'll probably actually go out and build some hardware because that was my first passion. It's my one true love. Right.
Nice.
Yeah.
I've heard a rumor that there's more spaces popping up around the U.S. and around the world to facilitate early stage building of things, to shamelessly plug the the part of the ecosystem that we're working on developing out.
Heard
But
of nothing.
that's awesome. And I guess let's close out with what's something that you're hopeful to see over the next, let's make it real short term, like 12 months.
I hope actually, let me direct this at startups, right? A lot of the startups in the space ecosystem have a winner takes all approach, right? Uh, and I think part of that comes from the fact that a lot of the wins come from government grants and DoD, like SIBRs and sitters and whatnot, right? So I guess it is in that way winner takes all, right? It's like you win the tender, you win the RFP, you win the grant, whatever, right? This becomes your customer. The problem though is that those aren't real life, right? It's it's like each year you're like resubmitting, and that's how you plan on sustaining your business. I think a it's potentially a terrible business plan, right? It's great at the beginning, gives you that validation, but potentially terrible. And so I see a lot of startups like uh, even with us. I'll give an example where we'll put something up and we're like, oh man, we're super happy about this thing, and we'll see folks copy that or you know, and try to do it in their own way to try and like step on it, and it feels really reductive for themselves because they really could just collaborate with us,
Yeah.
right? Even folks who are trying to do something similar, we like, why the hell not? You know what I mean? So I hope that within the next 12 months, folks start to understand that uh, like other startups are not your enemies, and they will find other ways to sync themselves, right? That's how startups work, right? You don't need to help them at all, right? And 95% fail. And that B, that there's a lot more cross collaboration. And there's one really cool one that's coming out that also I can't talk about, but I wish I could talk about it. But you will see. I'll ping it to you when it happens and say, this is what I was talking about before. So
Perfect.
we're announcing in the next few months, right? Really, really cool stuff and doing some really amazing startups. And that's the type of thing that I want to see a lot more of. And then the other thing then is with the primes and some of the big players, I hope that they stop hogging spectrum, right? And doing things like that, because it is finite. I know a lot of them were part of the creation of these different bands, but that we'll soon find out that doing that is a mistake, right? Yeah, so I hope that folks stop looking at things in that way and start actually working with each other, right? That'll be great for us, and also that we still exist and that we're thriving in the next 12 months. Yeah.
So those are all great call outs. And I think the collaboration is going to be fundamental for continuing to evolve and scale this developing ecosystem.
Yeah, agreed.
Awesome. Thank you. Chris, you want to take us out?
Yeah, absolutely. Great and stellar thanks to Rama Afullo of Satlyt. We are here with Let's Actuate, the podcast, which we'll do weekly. I can't think of anything else I would rather do on an amazing Friday afternoon than talk to founders. Thank you again, Rama. Till then, have a great one.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers, everyone.